Rachel Anderson stared at her bank account on her phone screen. $243. That was all she had left in the world. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, trying not to cry in the middle of the coffee shop where she'd been working on her laptop for the past 4 hours. She'd only bought one small coffee, nursing it slowly because she couldn't afford another one. Life hadn't always been this hard. Just 2 years ago, she'd had a decent job at an advertising agency in Portland, a nice apartment, and enough money to take her 2 kids out for pizza on Fridays. Then everything fell apart. First came the pandemic and her company laid off half the staff. She was one of them. Then her marriage crumbled under the pressure of unemployment and stress. The divorce took whatever savings she had left. Now she was 34 years old, living in her sister's spare bedroom with her 8-year-old son and 6-year-old daughter, doing freelance writing jobs whenever she could find them. Some months she made enough to contribute to groceries. Other months, like this one, she barely scraped together enough for gas money. She was tired of feeling like a failure. Tired of seeing the worry in her kids' eyes when they asked if they could have something at the store. Tired of depending on her sister's generosity. She needed a miracle, or at least a fighting chance to build something of her own. That's when she saw it. She'd been scrolling through an auction website, looking at cheap properties out of pure curiosity and maybe a bit of escapism. Most of them were lots of land in the middle of nowhere, or storage units being sold for unpaid rent. Then one listing caught her eye. Tiny house, Vermont as is condition, starting bid $1,000. The photo showed a small, run-down structure that looked like it might collapse in a strong wind. The paint was peeling off in chunks. Windows were broken. Weeds and vines had taken over, climbing up the walls like they were trying to pull the whole building back into the earth. The roof sagged in the middle like an old horse's back, but something about it called to her. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the tiny spark of hope that refused to die no matter how hard life tried to stomp it out. She read the description carefully. The house was about 400 square feet, built sometime in the late 1800s. It had been abandoned for more than 30 years. The estate of the previous owner was being settled, and the executor just wanted it gone. The property had been on the market for months with no takers. Now they were auctioning it off to the highest bidder with no reserve price. Rachel did some quick math in her head. Even if she won it for $1,000, she'd need money to get there, money to fix it up, money to live on while she worked on it. It was absolutely crazy to even consider this. She had 2 kids depending on her. She couldn't just throw away what little money she had on a gamble. She closed her laptop and tried to forget about it. But that night, lying in the twin bed in her sister's spare room while her children slept on the air mattress on the floor, she couldn't stop thinking about that little house. She pulled up the listing again on her phone, studying every photo in the darkness. What if she could fix it up? What if she could document the whole process and build a social media following? People loved renovation stories. Maybe she could turn it into something, get some sponsorships, make enough money to get back on her feet. It was a long shot, but wasn't any shot better than no shot at all? The next morning she called her mom. Her mother had always been practical, sometimes brutally so. Rachel explained the situation, expecting to be talked out of it. "How much money do you have saved?" her mother asked. "Not much. Maybe I could scrape together $1,500 if I max out my credit card." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Rachel, honey, I love you, but that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. You can't afford to waste money on a house that's probably ready to fall down. You have kids to think about." Her sister said the same thing. So did her best friend. Everyone told her it was a terrible idea, that she was being irrational, that she needed to focus on finding stable work, not chasing pipe dreams. But something inside Rachel had shifted. She'd spent 2 years playing it safe, doing everything right, and she'd only gotten more stuck. Maybe it was time to take a risk. Maybe it was time to bet on herself even if the odds were terrible. She placed a bid, $1,000. Then someone else bid $1,100. She bid $1,200. Back and forth it went for 2 days. Finally, the auction closed. Rachel had won with a final bid of $1,500. She sat staring at the confirmation email, her heart pounding. She'd just spent almost everything she had on a house she'd never seen in person, in a state she'd never visited, with no real plan for how to make it work. Either this was the beginning of something amazing, or she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. Her sister thought she'd lost her mind. "You can't just leave. What about the kids' school? What about finding work? What are you going to live on?" I can write from anywhere, Rachel said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. The kids can do online school for a semester. I'll document everything on social media. People do this kind of thing all the time. People who have money do this kind of thing, her sister corrected. You're broke. She wasn't wrong, but Rachel had already made up her mind. She bought 3 one-way bus tickets to Vermont, packed everything they owned into 4 suitcases and a backpack, and said goodbye to Portland. The bus ride took 3 days, with stops in strange towns and uncomfortable seats that made her back ache. Her kids thought it was an adventure at first, but by the second day they were tired and cranky. Rachel kept them occupied with games and stories, all while fighting the growing panic in her chest. What had she done? She'd uprooted her children for a fantasy. She'd spent money she couldn't afford to lose. She'd burned her bridges and jumped off a cliff, hoping she'd somehow figure out how to fly on the way down. They arrived in Vermont on a gray October morning. The small town nearest to the property looked like something from a postcard, with old buildings and trees showing off their fall colors. Rachel rented the cheapest car she could find and followed the GPS down increasingly narrow roads until they reached a rutted dirt driveway. And there it was. Her house, her investment, her big gamble. It looked even worse in person. The photos hadn't captured just how much the whole structure leaned to one side, or how many holes were in the roof, or how the front steps had rotted completely through. Her daughter took one look at it and started crying. "We're going to live here?" her son asked, his voice small. Rachel swallowed hard, fighting back her own tears. She'd dragged her kids across the country for this. She'd bet everything on this pile of rotting wood and broken dreams. "We're going to fix it up," she said, trying to sound brave. "It'll be an adventure. You'll see." But as she stood there in the morning fog, looking at the disaster she'd purchased, Rachel wondered if she'd just made the worst decision of her entire life. She had about $70 left to her name, 2 scared kids, and a house that looked like it might collapse if someone sneezed too hard. There was no going back now. This was either going to save her family or destroy what little they had left. The first night in the house was a disaster. Rachel had bought 3 sleeping bags and some camping supplies with the last of her money, thinking they could rough it for a few days until she figured things out. But when the sun went down, the temperature dropped fast and cold air whistled through every crack in the walls. Her daughter couldn't stop shivering. Her son kept asking when they could go back to Aunt Linda's house. Rachel lay awake most of the night, listening to mice scurrying in the walls and wondering what kind of mother dragged her kids to a place like this. But when morning came, she forced herself out of the sleeping bag and got to work. She couldn't afford to fall apart. Not now. The first week was brutal. Rachel started by clearing out decades of junk. Rotted furniture, old newspapers from the 1980s, broken dishes, and things she couldn't even identify. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust and grime that made them all cough. She wore a mask she'd had left over from the pandemic and tried to make it seem fun for the kids, like they were archaeologists exploring an ancient tomb. They found some interesting things: old glass bottles, a rusted toolbox, a cracked mirror with an ornate wooden frame. Rachel started taking photos and posting them on social media, documenting their journey. She called it Broke Mom Renovates. The first few posts got maybe 10 likes each, mostly from friends who felt sorry for her, but she kept at it. Every morning she'd post an update. Every evening she'd share their progress. She was honest about how hard it was, about the moments she wanted to give up, about eating peanut butter sandwiches for the 3rd day in a row, because that's all they could afford. The house revealed its problems slowly, like peeling back layers of a very ugly onion. The bathroom didn't work. The kitchen sink had a hole in it. Several floorboards in the bedroom were so rotten that Rachel's foot went straight through one of them. She marked the dangerous spots with bright tape so the kids wouldn't step there. Money was running out faster than she'd expected. She picked up whatever freelance writing work she could find, typing away on her laptop while sitting on the floor because they had no furniture. The kids did their schoolwork beside her, and at night they all huddled together in the one room that seemed structurally sound. After 2 weeks of cleaning, Rachel finally got to a point where she could see the bones of the house underneath all the decay. That's when she noticed something odd. The floorboards in the bedroom weren't like normal floorboards. They were made from thick, dark wood with beautiful grain patterns. They were also arranged in an unusual way, almost decorative. She ran her hand over the wood, feeling the texture. This wasn't cheap pine. This was something special. She took a photo and posted it online, asking if anyone knew what kind of wood it was. Within an hour, someone commented, "That looks like old-growth walnut. If that's original to the house, it could be worth something." Rachel's heart skipped a beat. She started researching the house's history. The local library had records going back to the 1800s, and the librarian, a kind older woman named Mrs. Patterson, seemed excited to help someone take an interest in local history. "Oh yes, the Blackwood House," Mrs. Patterson said, pulling out a dusty folder. "That place has quite a story." Rachel learned that the house had been built in 1887 by a man named Edmund Blackwood. He'd been a wealthy merchant who made his fortune in timber and shipping. According to the records, he'd built the small house as a private retreat, somewhere he could get away from his main estate in town. There were always rumors about old Edmund, Mrs. Patterson said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Even though they were the only ones in the library, people said he didn't trust banks, said he kept his wealth close. After he died in 1923, there was a big legal mess. His children fought over the estate for years. This little house got forgotten in all the fighting. "What happened to his money?" Rachel asked. Mrs. Patterson shrugged. "Nobody really knows. Some of it went to his heirs, but people always said there was more. Way more than what was ever found. But that's probably just small-town gossip. You know how stories grow over the years." Rachel thanked her and left, but her mind was spinning. She didn't really believe in hidden treasure. That was the stuff of movies and adventure books. Real life didn't work that way. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something strange about the house. That evening, she looked at everything with fresh eyes. The walls had odd markings on them, faint scratches that could have been random damage or could have been something else. In the corner of the main room, there was a section of wall that sounded hollow when she tapped on it. The basement had a bricked-up area that didn't seem to serve any purpose, and then there was the chimney. The house was tiny, but the chimney was massive, way bigger than it needed to be for such a small space. Rachel stood looking at it for a long time, trying to figure out why someone would build such an oversized chimney for a little retreat house. Her son noticed her staring at it. "Mom, what are you looking at?" "That chimney," she said. "Does it seem too big to you?" He shrugged. "I guess. Can we have dinner now?" She made them mac and cheese from a box, one of the few meals she could afford to keep making. While they ate, she couldn't stop thinking about the chimney, about the rumors, about why a rich man who didn't trust banks would build a house with such strange features. Her social media following had started to grow. She was up to 5,000 followers now, people who seemed genuinely interested in her journey. Some offered advice. Others sent words of encouragement. A few even sent small donations through a fundraising link she'd nervously set up. One follower sent her a message. "Have you checked inside the chimney? Old houses sometimes have hidden compartments." Rachel laughed it off at first, but the idea stuck in her head like a splinter. What if there was something there? What if the rumors weren't completely made up? She started researching Edmund Blackwood more seriously. She found old newspaper articles about his business dealings. She found records of his death, which had been sudden, a heart attack at age 62. She found documents showing that his estate had been tied up in legal battles for nearly a decade after he died. But she couldn't find any record of what happened to all his money. The estate settlement showed some assets, but not nearly as much as a successful timber and shipping merchant should have had. It was like a huge chunk of his fortune had simply vanished. Late one night, after the kids were asleep, Rachel went and stood in front of the chimney again. She put her hand on the bricks. They were cold and rough under her palm. She was being ridiculous. She was letting desperation and wishful thinking cloud her judgment. But what if? She grabbed a flashlight and shined it up inside the chimney. It was dark and sooty, but she could see the bricks going up. Nothing unusual. She tapped on the bricks at the bottom, listening to the sound. Solid. Normal. Then she tapped on a brick about 3 feet up. The sound was different. Slightly hollow. Her heart started beating faster. She tapped again. Definitely hollow. She tapped the bricks around it. Those were solid. Just that one brick and a few near it sounded wrong. Rachel sat back on her heels, breathing hard. This was crazy. She was probably imagining things. The house was old. Bricks settled and cracked. There were a million reasons why one brick might sound different from the others, but she couldn't let it go. Over the next few days, she kept coming back to that chimney. She'd tap on it. She'd shine her light up inside. She'd run her fingers over the bricks, looking for anything unusual. Her followers noticed her obsession. "What's going on with the chimney?" they asked. "Are you going to open it up?" Rachel didn't know what to do. If she started tearing into the chimney and there was nothing there, she'd have wasted time and energy she couldn't afford to waste. She'd have damaged the one working feature of the house. Her kids were already tired and homesick. She needed to focus on making the house livable, not chasing fairy tales. But late at night, when everything was quiet and she was alone with her thoughts, Rachel couldn't stop wondering. What if there really was something hidden in that chimney? What if Edmund Blackwood had left something behind? What if this broken-down house held the answer to all her problems? She made a decision. Tomorrow she'd start carefully removing bricks from that section of the chimney. She'd find out once and for all if she was chasing a dream or losing her mind. Rachel woke up early the next morning with butterflies in her stomach. The kids were still asleep in their sleeping bags, curled up together like puppies. She grabbed the crowbar she'd bought at the hardware store and walked over to the chimney. Her hands were shaking. This was either going to be the moment everything changed, or the moment she proved to herself that she'd completely lost touch with reality. She decided to document it. If there was nothing there, at least her followers would get some entertainment out of watching her make a fool of herself. If there was something there, well, she'd want to remember this moment forever. She set up her phone on a stack of books, hit record, and took a deep breath. "Okay," she said to the camera, trying to keep her voice steady. "So I've been obsessing over this chimney for days. There's a section that sounds hollow, and given the history of this house, I think it's worth checking out. I'm probably about to waste a morning destroying a perfectly good chimney, but here goes nothing." She positioned the crowbar against the mortar around the brick that had sounded hollow. The mortar was old and crumbly, which made the work easier than she expected. The first brick came loose after just a few minutes of prying. Behind it was darkness. Rachel's heart hammered against her ribs. She grabbed her flashlight and shined it into the gap. There was definitely a space back there, bigger than it should be. She worked faster now, removing the bricks around the first one. Her arms ached and sweat dripped down her face despite the cold morning air. More bricks came loose, revealing a cavity that had been deliberately built into the chimney structure. And then she saw it. A metal box about the size of a shoebox wedged into the space. It was covered in soot and cobwebs, but it was definitely there. It was real. Rachel's legs went weak. She sat down hard on the floor, staring at the box. For a moment, she couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. This wasn't supposed to actually happen. People didn't really find hidden treasure in old houses. That wasn't how real life worked, but there it was. With trembling hands, she reached into the cavity and pulled the box out. It was heavier than she expected. The metal was old and tarnished, with a wax seal around the edges that had cracked with age. There was no lock, just a simple latch. She looked at her phone, still recording, then back at the box. Her whole body was shaking now. She took another deep breath and opened the latch. The lid creaked as it lifted. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were bundles of papers. Rachel carefully unwrapped the first bundle. Her eyes went wide, stock certificates. Dozens of them. She recognized some of the company names from history classes: Standard Oil, United States Steel, General Electric. The dates on them were from the early 1900s, over 100 years old. There was more. Gold coins in a small leather pouch. They were heavy and real, with dates from the 1880s and 90s. A few pieces of jewelry wrapped in cloth, including a pocket watch with intricate engraving and what looked like diamonds set into the cover, and papers. Handwritten documents in careful, old-fashioned script. Rachel's hands shook so badly she could barely read them, but she could make out enough to understand they were records. Records of investments, properties, and other assets. All signed by Edmund Blackwood. She sat there on the floor, surrounded by a century-old fortune, and started crying. Not delicate tears, but big, ugly sobs that came from somewhere deep in her chest. All the fear, all the stress, all the nights wondering how she'd feed her kids, all the times she'd felt like a complete failure. It all came pouring out. Her son woke up first. "Mom, why are you crying? Are you okay?" She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face, and started laughing. She couldn't help it. The whole situation was so absurd. "I'm okay, baby. I'm more than okay. Come here. You need to see this." Both kids came over, rubbing sleep from their eyes. They stared at the contents of the box spread out on the floor. "What is all that?" her daughter asked. "I think," Rachel said, her voice still shaky, "I think it might be treasure." "Real treasure?" Her son's eyes got huge. "Like pirate treasure, sort of. But this belonged to the man who built this house. He hid it here and nobody found it until now." The kids started asking a million questions, but Rachel's mind was already racing ahead. She needed to be smart about this. She couldn't just run out and try to cash in century-old stock certificates. She needed help. Legal help. Expert help. First, she carefully photographed everything. Every document, every coin, every piece of paper. She documented the exact location where she'd found it, the condition of everything, all of it. Then she very gently packed it all back into the metal box. Her social media was exploding. The video of her opening the chimney had been running the whole time and people were going crazy in the comments. Her few thousand followers had jumped to tens of thousands within hours. Everyone wanted to know what she'd found, if it was real, what she was going to do. Rachel posted a brief update. "Found something in the chimney. Can't share details yet, but it's real. I need to talk to lawyers and experts before I say more. Thank you all for following this journey. I can't believe this is happening." She called Mrs. Patterson at the library first. The librarian connected her with a local attorney who specialized in property law and estate issues. His name was Henry Chen, and he agreed to see her that afternoon. Rachel drove to his office with the metal box locked in the trunk of her rental car. She felt paranoid, like someone might try to rob her at any moment, even though nobody except her followers knew what she'd found. Mr. Chen was a serious man in his 50s with kind eyes and a calm demeanor. He listened to her story without interrupting, then asked to see what she'd found. He spent nearly an hour examining everything with gloves on, making notes, taking his own photographs. Finally, he sat back and looked at her. "Ms. Anderson, do you understand what you potentially have here?" "Old stock certificates?" Rachel said. "And some gold and jewelry?" "These aren't just old stock certificates. If these are authentic, and I believe they are, they represent ownership in companies that have grown exponentially over the past century. Through stock splits and dividend reinvestment, these certificates could be worth millions of dollars. Maybe more." Rachel felt dizzy. "Millions? Potentially. But," he held up a hand, "there are significant legal complications. Edmund Blackwood died in 1923. His estate was never fully settled. You bought the house, but does that give you legal right to what was hidden inside? That's not a simple question. There may be heirs who have claim to this. The state of Vermont might have claimed to it as abandoned property. The people who sold you the house might argue they should have been told about this." Rachel's brief moment of hope started to crumble. Of course it wasn't going to be that easy. Nothing in her life was ever easy. "So what do I do?" she asked quietly. "You fight," Mr. Chen said. "You establish your legal right to this discovery. It won't be quick and it won't be simple. But I believe you have a strong case. You purchased the property in good faith. The treasure was deliberately concealed. The previous owners didn't disclose it because they didn't know about it. Under Vermont law, you have what's called finder's rights, but we'll need to move carefully." Over the next few days, Mr. Chen helped her arrange to have the items authenticated by experts. The stock certificates went to a financial historian who specialized in early 20th century investments. The gold coins went to a numismatist. The jewelry went to an appraiser. Every single expert came back with the same answer. Everything was genuine. Everything was valuable. When the estimates started coming in, Rachel had to sit down. The stock certificates alone, accounting for over a century of splits and dividends, could be worth anywhere from $3 to $5 million. The gold coins were worth another 100,000. The jewelry, particularly the diamond-studded pocket watch, was worth at least 50,000 more. Rachel's discovery was worth over $4 million. Maybe more, but the news had gotten out. Local papers picked up the story. Then regional news. Then national news. Suddenly, Rachel wasn't just a broke mom trying to fix up an old house. She was the woman who found hidden treasure. And with that attention came problems. Big problems. 3 different people came forward claiming to be descendants of Edmund Blackwood. They wanted the treasure. They said it belonged to them, not to some stranger who happened to buy the house. The family who had sold Rachel the house for $1,500 filed a lawsuit, arguing they deserved a share since the treasure had technically been on their property. The state of Vermont sent official letters claiming that unclaimed property should escheat to the government. That was the legal term. It meant the state wanted to take it. Rachel's phone rang constantly with reporters, lawyers, and people trying to get a piece of what she'd found. She had to disconnect her number. She had to stop posting on social media for a while because the attention was overwhelming. But through it all, Mr. Chen kept working. He filed motions. He gathered evidence. He built a case arguing that Rachel had every legal right to what she'd discovered. "This is going to be a long fight," he told her. "Are you ready for that?" Rachel looked at her kids, thought about all they'd been through, all they deserved, and nodded. "I've come this far," she said. "I'm not giving up now." The legal battle consumed Rachel's life for the next year and a half. Some days she felt hopeful. Other days she wanted to give up completely. The stress was eating her alive. The first lawsuit came from the distant relatives of Edmund Blackwood. A woman named Patricia Westmore claimed her great-great-grandfather had been Edmund's brother. She hired expensive lawyers from Boston who filed thick stacks of paperwork arguing that the treasure should go to Edmund's descendants, not to some random person who bought a house. Then came the Hendersons, the family who had sold Rachel the house. They showed up with their own lawyer, an aggressive man who gave interviews to every news outlet that would listen. "My clients sold that property in good faith," he said on the local news. "They had no idea there was treasure hidden inside. If they had known, they never would have sold it for $1,500. They deserve compensation." The state's case was the most threatening. Vermont's unclaimed property laws said that if nobody could prove ownership of abandoned assets, those assets belonged to the government. Their lawyers argued that Edmund Blackwood had been dead for over a century. His estate had been settled decades ago, and anything left behind was now public property. Rachel couldn't afford lawyers like the ones going after her. Mr. Chen was helping, but he was just one person working out of a small office. She was terrified she'd lose everything before she ever got to touch a penny of it. That's when something unexpected happened. Her social media followers rallied around her. She'd been documenting the whole journey from the beginning. People had watched her struggle, seen her sleep on the floor with her kids, followed along as she cleaned out the house. They'd celebrated with her when she found the treasure, and now they were angry on her behalf. Someone started a crowdfunding campaign to help with legal fees. Rachel didn't even know who started it at first, but within 24 hours it had raised $50,000. Within a week, over $200,000. People from all over the country were donating $5, $10, $20, all saying the same thing: "Don't let them steal your treasure." The media attention grew bigger. Rachel's story was everywhere. News shows did segments on her. Podcasts interviewed her. She became the face of the underdog fighting against powerful people who wanted to take what she'd found. A law firm in New York that specialized in property disputes reached out. They'd been following her case and wanted to help. They offered to represent her pro bono, which meant for free. The lead attorney, a woman named Jennifer Rao, had made her career fighting for people who couldn't afford justice. "Your case matters," Jennifer told Rachel during their first phone call. "Not just for you, but for everyone. If we let them take what you found, we're saying that ordinary people don't have rights, that only the wealthy and powerful matter. I want to fight for you." With Jennifer's help, the case became more organized. They built their argument carefully. Rachel had purchased the property legally. The treasure had been deliberately concealed, not just lost or abandoned. The previous owners had no knowledge of it and therefore couldn't claim they'd been deceived. The distant relatives had never bothered to search the property themselves in all the decades it sat empty. As for the state's claim, Jennifer argued that finder's rights applied. Under Vermont law, if someone finds property that was intentionally hidden and the original owner is dead with no clear heirs, the finder has first claim to it. Edmund Blackwood had no direct descendants. His children had all died without their own children. The relatives claiming ownership were so distantly related that they'd never even known the house existed until they saw Rachel's story on the news. But proving all this required endless paperwork, depositions, and court appearances. Rachel had to tell her story over and over again. She had to sit in conference rooms while lawyers grilled her about why she bought the house, whether she'd had any prior knowledge of the treasure, whether she'd been trying to defraud anyone. The questioning was brutal sometimes. Patricia Westmore's lawyer tried to make Rachel look like a con artist. "Isn't it convenient," he said during one deposition, "that you just happened to buy this specific house? That you just happened to look in the chimney? That you just happened to find millions of dollars?" Rachel kept her cool, though inside she was screaming. "I bought the house because it was all I could afford. I looked in the chimney because it seemed oddly large. I found the treasure because I got lucky. That's it. That's the whole story." The Hendersons' lawyer took a different approach. He tried to paint Rachel as someone who took advantage of an elderly couple who didn't know what they were selling. Never mind that the Hendersons weren't elderly and had hired a professional estate executor to handle the sale. Never mind that the executor had inspected the property and found nothing unusual. The lawyer twisted everything to make Rachel look like the villain. Through it all, her social media following kept growing. She was up to over 1 million followers now. People were invested in her story. They wanted her to win. She started posting updates about the legal battle, always careful not to say anything that might hurt her case, but sharing enough to keep people engaged. The attention brought opportunities. A publisher reached out about writing a book. A production company wanted to make a documentary. Rachel said no to most of it. She couldn't think about any of that until the legal mess was resolved. But she did start a YouTube channel where she posted longer videos about the renovation process and what she was learning. About Edmund Blackwood's life. The research into Edmund's past became a welcome distraction from the stress of the lawsuits. Rachel spent hours at the library and online, piecing together his story. He'd been a fascinating person. Born poor, he'd built a fortune through hard work and smart investments. He'd never married, had no children of his own, but had raised his brother's kids after his brother died young. He'd been known as a fair businessman, but also as someone who kept his cards close to his chest. The more Rachel learned about him, the more she understood why he'd hidden his wealth. He'd lived through bank failures and economic panics. He'd seen people lose everything overnight. Of course, he didn't trust institutions with his money. Of course, he'd hidden it somewhere only he knew about. She almost felt like she knew him, this man who'd died a century ago. Sometimes she wondered what he'd think about all this drama over the fortune he'd so carefully concealed. The case wound its way through the court system slowly. Months passed. Rachel's kids adjusted to their new normal. They enrolled in the local school. They made friends. The little house, which Rachel had continued to renovate during all the legal chaos, was actually becoming livable. She'd fixed the roof, replaced the dangerous floorboards, and got the plumbing working. It would never be fancy, but it was home. She supported them through freelance writing and the ad revenue from her growing YouTube channel. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The treasure sat in a bank vault, untouchable until the courts decided who it belonged to. Finally, 18 months after finding the treasure, they got a court date. All the parties would present their cases to a judge who would make a final ruling. Jennifer warned Rachel not to get her hopes up. "Judges can be unpredictable," she said. "We have a strong case, but there are no guarantees. You need to be prepared for any outcome." Rachel tried to prepare herself. She tried to imagine losing, going back to barely scraping by, having to tell her kids that the treasure wasn't theirs after all. But deep down, she couldn't accept that possibility. She'd come too far. She'd fought too hard. The day of the hearing, Rachel wore the nicest outfit she owned, a simple dress she'd bought at a thrift store. Her hands shook as she walked into the courthouse. The room was packed with lawyers, reporters, and curious observers who'd been following the case. Patricia Westmore was there with her Boston lawyers, looking confident. The Hendersons sat with their attorney, whispering to each other and shooting angry looks at Rachel. The state's representatives sat stone-faced, surrounded by files and documents. Jennifer squeezed Rachel's hand. "No matter what happens, you've already won in the ways that matter. You've built a life for yourself and your kids. You've inspired millions of people. Don't forget that." But Rachel wanted the treasure. She needed it. Not just for the money, though, that would change everything. She needed to win because she'd risked everything on that broken-down house. She needed to prove that sometimes when you bet on yourself against all odds, you come out on top. The judge entered the courtroom. Everyone stood. Rachel's heart pounded so hard she thought everyone must be able to hear it. "Please be seated," the judge said. "Let's begin." The next 6 hours were a blur of legal arguments, objections, and testimony. Rachel had to take the stand and tell her story again. The other side tried to poke holes in it. Jennifer defended every point. Finally, late in the afternoon, The judge called for a recess to review everything and prepare her decision. Rachel sat outside the courtroom with her lawyer, too nervous to eat the sandwich someone had brought her. "How do you think it went?" she asked Jennifer. "I think we made our case," Jennifer said carefully. "But like I said, judges are unpredictable. We'll know soon." 2 hours later, they were called back into the courtroom. The judge sat down, adjusted her glasses, and looked out at everyone gathered. "I've reviewed all the evidence and arguments presented today," she began. "This is my ruling." Rachel held her breath. This was it, the moment that would determine everything. The judge's voice was steady and calm, completely at odds with the chaos Rachel felt inside. Every second felt like an hour. She gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. After careful consideration of the evidence and applicable law, the judge continued, "I find that Ms. Anderson purchased the property legally and in good faith. The treasure was deliberately concealed by Edmund Blackwood, not simply lost or abandoned. The previous owners had no knowledge of its existence and made no representations about it during the sale." Rachel's heart was pounding so loud she could barely hear the words. Furthermore, the claimants who say they are descended from Edmund Blackwood have failed to establish a direct line of inheritance. The estate was settled in 1931, and no claims were made at that time regarding hidden assets. As for the state's claim, I find that finder's rights apply in this situation. Ms. Anderson discovered property that was intentionally hidden, and under Vermont law, she has legal claim to it. Jennifer grabbed Rachel's hand and squeezed it hard. "However," the judge said, and Rachel's stomach dropped, "I am ordering that Ms. Anderson pay a settlement to the Henderson family in the amount of $75,000, as they did sell the property below market value, and this seems a fair compromise. I'm also ordering that she pay the state of Vermont $50,000 in taxes and fees related to this discovery." The judge looked directly at Rachel. The remainder of the treasure and all proceeds from it belonged to Ms. Anderson. The metal box, its contents, and all financial instruments contained within are her legal property. Rachel couldn't breathe. She'd won. She'd actually won. The courtroom erupted. Patricia Westmore and her lawyers were arguing with each other. The Hendersons looked disappointed but not angry. The reporters were scrambling to get out and file their stories. Jennifer was hugging Rachel and saying something, but Rachel couldn't hear over the ringing in her ears. She'd won. After a year and a half of fighting, of stress, of wondering if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life, she'd won. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Jennifer helped her set up meetings with financial advisors and accountants. The stock certificates had to be authenticated again by the companies involved, then converted to current shares. The process was complicated and slow, but eventually the numbers became real. After legal fees, the settlement to the Hendersons, the taxes, and various other expenses, Rachel walked away with just over $4 million. $4 million. She couldn't wrap her mind around it. She'd gone from having $243 in her bank account to being a millionaire. She kept checking her balance like it might disappear if she looked away. The first thing she did was cry. Just sat on the floor of the little house and sobbed until she had no tears left. Then she called her sister. "I won," she said. "Linda, I actually won." Her sister screamed so loud Rachel had to hold the phone away from her ear. "Oh my God, oh my God." "I can't believe it. I mean, I can believe it. You deserve this, but oh my God." Rachel's mom cried too when she called her. "I'm sorry I told you it was crazy," her mom said. "I'm sorry I didn't believe in you." "It was crazy," Rachel laughed. "You were right to think I'd lost my mind. I kind of had, but crazy had paid off. Crazy had changed everything. Rachel was smart about the money. She didn't go out and buy a mansion or a fancy car. She bought a comfortable house back in Portland. Nothing huge, just big enough for her and the kids to have their own rooms and a backyard to play in. She put money aside for their college funds. She invested most of it, living off the interest and her YouTube income, because her channel had exploded. She was up to 2 million subscribers now. People who had followed her journey from that first day cleaning out the tiny house to the final court victory. She kept making videos about home renovation, treasure hunting history, and single parenting. She was honest about the struggles and the wins. People loved her for it. The sponsorship deals started rolling in. Home improvement companies wanted her to use their products. Financial services companies wanted her to talk about money management. She was careful about what she accepted. only working with brands she actually believed in. But the treasure wasn't just about money. It had given Rachel something bigger than that. It had given her confidence, proof that taking risks could pay off, that betting on herself had been the right choice even when everyone said she was being foolish. She kept the tiny house in Vermont, finished the renovation completely, turning it into a beautiful little retreat. She documented the whole process, and that series of videos became some of her most popular content. The old walnut floors, once she cleaned and refinished them, were absolutely gorgeous. The oversized chimney became a feature wall. She found period-appropriate fixtures and furniture, honoring Edmund Blackwood's original vision while making it livable for modern life. Sometimes she'd go there just to sit and think, to remember where she'd come from, to remind herself that she'd bought this place with her last $1,500 when she had nothing and no one believed in her. Rachel also started using her platform to help other people. She'd lived through poverty and desperation. She knew what it felt like to choose between feeding your kids and paying rent. She started a foundation that gave grants to single parents trying to get back on their feet. Small amounts, $5,000 or $10,000, but enough to make a difference, enough to give someone else a fighting chance. She funded programs for housing assistance, job training, and childcare. She partnered with organizations that helped families in crisis. She shared stories of the people her foundation helped on her channel, always with their permission, showing that everyone deserves a second chance. The book deal she'd turned down before, she accepted it now. She wrote her memoir, telling the whole story from beginning to end. The struggles, the divorce, living in her sister's spare room, taking the crazy risk on the house, finding the treasure, the legal battle, all of it. She called it The House That Saved Me. It became a bestseller. Rachel went on a book tour, speaking at events around the country. She was honest in her talks. She told people that she got lucky, that finding treasure in a chimney wasn't a reproducible life plan. But she also told them that sometimes you have to take risks. Sometimes you have to bet everything on a crazy dream. Sometimes you have to believe in yourself even when no one else does. Young women especially connected with her story. Single mothers who felt stuck. People drowning in debt or bad situations who needed to hear that things could get better. Rachel answered as many messages as she could, offering encouragement and practical advice. Her kids thrived. Her son joined the soccer team at his new school and made honor roll. Her daughter took art classes and discovered she loved painting. They were happy, stable, and secure. Sometimes Rachel would watch them playing in their backyard and have to pinch herself. This was real. This was their life now. 3 years after finding the treasure, Rachel sat in her comfortable living room doing an interview for a documentary about her story. The filmmaker asked her what the most important thing she'd learned was. Rachel thought about it for a moment. "I learned that rock bottom can be a foundation," she said. "When I bought that house, I had nothing to lose. I was already at the bottom. So I took a chance. And yeah, I found literal treasure, which is insane and lucky and not something most people will ever experience. But the real treasure wasn't the money. What was it?" the filmmaker asked. "It was remembering that I'm capable of more than I thought. It was learning to trust my instincts. It was proving to my kids that their mom is brave and strong even when I'm scared. The money changed our circumstances, but the journey changed who I am." She paused, looking at a framed photo on her wall. It was from that first day at the tiny house. Her and the kids standing in front of the dilapidated building, looking tired and uncertain and hopeful all at once. "I bought that house for $1,500 when everyone told me I was being stupid," Rachel continued. "I chose to believe there was something valuable there, even when all I could see was rot and ruin. And I was right. But even if I'd been wrong, even if there had been no treasure, I still would have learned that I could do hard things, that I could take risks and survive. That would have been valuable too." The documentary aired 6 months later. Rachel watched it with her kids, her sister, and her mom. When it was over, her daughter looked up at her. "Mom, do you think we'll ever find another treasure?" Rachel smiled and pulled her close. "Baby, we already did. We found each other. We found a home. We found out how strong we are. That's the best treasure anyone could ask for." But she kept the metal box that had held Edmund Blackwood's fortune. It sat on a shelf in her office, empty now but still precious. Sometimes she'd take it down and run her fingers over the tarnished metal, remembering that cold October morning when she'd pulled it from the chimney, and everything changed. Life was good now. Not perfect, but good. Rachel had learned that sometimes the craziest decisions lead to the best outcomes, that sometimes you have to risk everything to gain anything, that sometimes, against all odds, broken things can be fixed and desperate gambles can pay off. And somewhere, she liked to think, Edmund Blackwood was looking down and smiling. His treasure had finally found someone who needed it, someone who would use it well, someone who understood that real wealth isn't just about money, it's about having the courage to bet on yourself when the chips are down. Rachel had bought a tiny house for pennies. What she found inside made her a millionaire, but what she discovered about herself was priceless.